Chapter 7, Lord of the Flies, Shadows and Tall Trees. The pig run kept close to the jumble of rocks that lay down by the water on the other side, and Ralph was content to follow Jack along it. If you could shut your ears to the slow suck down of the sea and boil of the return, if you could forget how dun and unvisited were the thick ferny coverts on either side, then there was a chance that you might put the beast out of mind and dream for a while. The sun had swung over the vertical, and the afternoon heat was closing in on the island. Ralph passed a message forward to Jack, and when they next came to fruit, the whole party stopped and ate. Sitting, Ralph was aware of the heat for the first time that day. He pulled distastefully at his gray shirt and wondered whether he might undertake the adventure of washing it. Sitting under what seemed an unusual heat, even for this island, Ralph planned his toilet. He would like to have a pair of scissors and cut his hair. He flung the mass back, cut this filthy hair right back to half an inch. He would like to have a bath, a proper wallow with soap. He passed his tongue experimentally over his teeth and decided that a toothbrush would come in handy too. Then there were his nails. Ralph turned his hand over and examined them. They were bitten down to the quick, though he could not remember when he had restarted this habit, nor any time when he indulged it. "He's sucking my thumb next." He looked round furtively. Apparently no one had heard. The hunters sat, stuffing themselves with this easy meal, trying to convince themselves that they got sufficient kick out of bananas and that other olive-gray, jelly-like fruit. With the memory of his sometime clean self as a standard, Ralph looked them over. They were dirty, not with the spectacular dirt of boys who have fallen into mud or been brought down hard on a rainy day. Not one of them was an obvious subject for a shower, and yet hair, much too long, tangled here and there, knotted round a dead leaf or a twig, faces cleaned fairly well by the process of eating and sweating, but marked in the less accessible angles with a kind of shadow. Clothes, worn away, stiff like his own with sweat, put on, not for decorum or comfort, but out of custom. The skin of the body scurfy with brine. He discovered with a little fall of the heart that these were the conditions he took as normal now, and that he did not mind. He sighed and pushed away the stalk from which he had stripped the fruit. Already the hunters were stealing away to do their business in the woods or down by the rocks. He turned and looked out to sea. Here on the other side of the island, the view was utterly different. The filmy enchantments of mirage could not endure the cold ocean water, and the horizon was hard, clipped blue. Ralph wandered down to the rocks. Down here, almost on a level with the sea, you could follow with your eye the ceaseless bulging passage of the deep sea waves. They were miles wide, apparently not breakers or the banked ridges of shallow water. They traveled the length of the island with an air of disregarding it and being set on other business. They were less a progress than a momentous rise and fall of the whole ocean. Now the sea would suck down, making cascades and waterfalls of retreating water, would sink past the rocks and plaster down the seaweed like shining hair, then, pausing, gather and rise with a roar, irresistibly swelling over point and outcrop, climbing the little cliffs, sending at last an arm of surf up a gully to end a yard or so from him in fingers of spray. Wave after wave, Ralph followed the rise and fall until something of the remoteness of the sea numbed his brain. Then, gradually, the almost infinite size of this water forced itself on his attention. This was the divider, the barrier. On the other side of the island, swathed at midday with mirage, defended by the shield of the quiet lagoon, one might dream of rescue. But here, faced by the brute obtuseness of the ocean, the miles of division, one was clamped down, one was helpless, one was condemned, one was. Simon was speaking almost in his ear. Ralph found that he had rock painfully gripped in both hands, found his body arched, the muscles of his neck stiff, his mouth strained open. "You'll get back to where you came from." Simon nodded as he spoke. He was kneeling on one knee, looking down from a higher rock which he held with both hands, his other leg stretched down to Ralph's level. Ralph was puzzled and searched Simon's face for a clue. "It's so big. I mean," Simon nodded. "All the same, you'll get back all right. I think so, anyway." Some of the strain had gone from Ralph's body. He glanced at the sea and then smiled bitterly at Simon. "Got a ship in your pocket?" Simon grinned and shook his head. How do you know then? When Simon was still silent, Ralph said curtly, "You're batty." Simon shook his head violently till the coarse black hair flew backwards and forwards across his face. "No, I'm not. I just, you'll get back all right." For a moment, nothing more was said, and then they suddenly smiled at each other. Roger called from the coverts, "Come and see!" The ground was turned over near the pig run, and there were droppings that steamed. Jack bent down to them as though he loved them. "Ralph, we need meat, even if we are hunting the other thing." "If you mean going the right way, we'll hunt." They set off again, and the hunters bunched a little by fear of the mentioned beast while Jack quested ahead. They went more slowly than Ralph had bargained for, yet in a way he was glad to loiter, cradling his spear. Jack came up against some emergency of his craft, and soon the procession stopped. Ralph leaned against a tree, and at once the daydreams came swarming up. Jack was in charge of the hunt, and there would be time to get to the mountain. Once, following his father from Chatham to Devonport, they had lived in a cottage on the edge of the moors. In the succession of houses that Ralph had known, this one stood out with particular clarity because after that house, he had been sent away to school. Mummy had still been with them, and had come home every day. Wild ponies came to the stone wall at the bottom of the garden, and it had snowed. Just behind the cottage, there was a sort of shed, and you could lie up there watching the flakes swirl past, see the damp spot where each flake died. Then you could mark the first flake that lay down without melting and watch the whole ground turn white. You could go indoors when you were cold and look out of the window past the bright copper kettle and plate with little blue men. When you went to bed, there was a bowl of cornflakes with sugar and cream, and the books. They stood on the shelf by the bed, leaning together with always two or three laid flat on top because he had not bothered to put them back properly. They were dog-eared and scratched. There was the bright, shining one about Topsy and Mopsy that he never read because it was about two girls. There was one about the magician, which you read with a kind of tied-down terror, skipping page 27 with the awful picture of the spider. The book about people who had dug things up, Egyptian things. There was the boy's book of trains, the boy's book of ships. Vividly, they came before him. He could have reached up and touched them, could feel the weight and slow slide with which the mammoth book for boys could come out and slither down. Everything was all right. Everything was good humored and friendly. The bushes crashed ahead of him. Boys flung themselves wildly from the pig track and scrabbled in the creepers, screaming. Ralph saw Jack nudged aside and fall. Then there was a creature bounding along the pig track toward him, with tusks gleaming and an intimidating grunt. Ralph found he was able to measure the distance coldly and take aim. With the boar only 5 yards away, he flung the foolish wooden stick that he carried, saw it hit the great snout and hang there for a moment. The boar's note changed to a squeal, and it swerved aside into the covert. The big the pig run filled with shouting boys again. Jack came running back and poked about in the undergrowth. "Through here! What did you do us? Through here, I said." The boar was floundering away from them. They found another pig run parallel to the first, and Jack raced away. Ralph was full of fright and apprehension and pride. "I hit him. The spear stuck in." Now they came unexpectedly to an open space by the sea. Jack cast about on the bare rock and looked anxious. "He's gone." "I hit him," said Ralph again, "and the spear stuck in a bit." He felt the need of witnesses. "Didn't you see me?" Maurice nodded. "I saw you. Right bang on his snout. Whee!" Ralph tacked on excitedly. "I hit him all right. The spear stuck in. I wounded him." He sunned himself in their new respect and felt that hunting was good after all. "I walloped him properly. That was the beast, I think." Jack came back. "That wasn't the beast. That was a boar. I hit him." "Why didn't you grab him?" "I tried." Ralph's voice ran up. "But a boar!" Jack flushed suddenly. "He said he'd do us. What did you want to throw for? Why didn't you wait?" He held out his arm. "Look." He turned his left forearm for all them to see. On the outside was a rip, not much, but bloody. "He did that with his tusk. I couldn't get my spear down in time." Attention focused on Jack. "That's a wound," said Simon, "and you ought to suck it like Berengaria." Jack sucked. "I hit him," said Ralph indignantly. "I hit him with my spear. I wounded him." He tried for their attention. He was coming along the path. "I threw like this." Robert snarled at him. Ralph entered into play and everybody laughed. They were all jabbing at Robert, who made mock rushes. Jack shouted, "Make a ring!" The circle moved in and round. Robert squealed in mock terror, then in real pain. "Ow! Stop it! You're hurting!" The butt end of a spear fell on his back as he blundered among them. "Hold him!" They got his arms and legs. Ralph, carried away by a sudden thick excitement, grabbed Eric's spear and jabbed at Robert with it. "Kill him! Kill him!" All at once, Robert was screaming and struggling with the strength of frenzy. Jack caught him by the hair and was brandishing his knife. Behind him was Roger, fighting to get close. The chant rose ritually, as at the last moment of a dance or hunt. "Kill the pig! Cut his throat! Kill the pig! Bash him in!" Ralph, too, was fighting to get nearer, to get a handful of that brown, vulnerable flesh. The desire to squeeze and hurt was overmastering. Jack's arm came down, the heaving circle cheered and made pig dying noises. Then they lay quiet, panting, listening to Robert's frightened snivels. He wiped his face with the dirty arm and made an effort to retrieve his status.